Indeed. I like it.
I realize how green is.
So you open it, you like.
You don't want to see mine. My laptop's the first one at Pennie, and so it's horrific.
Yeah, what happens is you open it and then you look at it, you look at your neighbors and you wipe it real quick so they don't see. So like the fingerprints or the crumbs or anything.
Here you go.
You're fine.
You want to check? Can you hear us now, folks on the phone?
Yeah.
Perfect. Welcome back. We're going to get started on the second part of today's planning agenda. I will turn it over to Devin to start talking about contingency planning.
We're actually going to go back in the agenda a bit to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped the 2025 focus areas before we start contingency planning. So I'm actually going to Jennifer. Sorry to kick you off the agenda.
No, that's okay. So yes, back from lunch. Thank you. So we're going to dive in with the 2025 overview and kind of a where do we go from here? So as we just talked about before lunch, there is a lot of uncertainty currently with the enhanced premium tax credits as well as with some of the operational items that we discussed. However, we felt it was important to try to capture a vision statement for our organization moving forward. So we've had a mission statement since the very beginning, and that statement is Pennie aims to maximize the number of Pennsylvanians with affordable quality health coverage and to facilitate informed consumer decision making. And so you'll see bolded there our vision statement, which is really derived from our purpose, but it's meant to be more aspirational. It's meant to be very forward-looking and directional in terms of what projects we are selecting to really move the needle towards this ultimate state. We also think that it's important to have a statement like this to really motivate the team and help them understand where we are headed. So the vision statement that we have captured for Pennie is to be the most trusted source of health coverage, the unparalleled model of intuitive consumer experience, and the keystone of health and financial security for Pennsylvanians. And so on the next couple slides, we're going to dive into the strategic goals for this year, and you'll see they're very similar to the ones that we have had in the past. However, they're very much starting to get specific into the areas that we want to look in to try to achieve this vision. So the next slide is, these are the four proposed strategic goals for 2025. Even though they are very similar to the ones that you all had reviewed and approved for 2024, I think we are going to ask for a motion to approve these moving forward. And, just looking at these four, we think they are high level enough to really capture the work that we are doing, both from an internal and programmatic perspective, as well as more external facing. And so we don't anticipate these changing year over year. We do anticipate that these would continue for the next couple of years, but the initiatives or like targeted areas that we are trying to accomplish to move the needle under these goals would change year over year. So just to kind of list these out, we have four proposed goals. The first goal is focused very much on quality and excellence for the program. So it's establish Pennie as a trusted and objective source of clear information about coverage. We're going to be looking at our program, and you'll see with some of the initiatives that we've called out, trying to make sure that all of the information that we're kind of posting publicly with regards to Pennie as well as documentation that we have internally. We want to make sure it's of the highest quality. We want to make sure it's accurate, that it's consistent, so that whenever a consumer or external partner is hearing something from Pennie, it remains the same no matter where they're hearing it from. And it really increases that trust in us being the experts in this area. The second goal is promoting simplicity and clarity into processes to improve accessibility. So this is one of the slight changes from the 2024 goals. We had accessibility called out in the third goal, kind of tied with awareness. We felt like accessibility fit a little bit more cleanly into our process goal. Because there are quite a few processes at Pennie that consumers interact with where we can simplify and clarify them so that there are, very reduced barriers, if not no barriers, to getting enrolled and maintaining coverage through Pennie. So that second goal is very much focused on accessibility and simplicity with Pennie processes. The third goal we have as increase awareness of Pennie at local and state levels across Pennsylvania. So this is very much an awareness-specific goal, and we did a lot of research and surveys into where awareness of Pennie currently stands, and I think we're about 30% awareness rate across Pennsylvania. And so we wanted to have this as a very targeted goal to try to move the needle in terms of increasing awareness through a number of diversified interventions and connections with communities across the Commonwealth. And then the fourth goal is something that, again, it's inherent in our mission. It's also called out in our vision statement, but it was never a specific goal, which is an affordability goal. So we felt that with the amount of work and conversations that we've been having related to the enhanced premium tax credits, the state subsidy program at the state level, we felt like this warranted a specific strategic goal to really capture the work that we're doing. And so that is to make health coverage through Pennie more affordable. Any questions or comments on these four goals before we dive in at a very high level to some of the outcomes and initiatives that would be tied to these goals?
Colleen, just the last one, just obviously there's a lot of work that's happening, but as we're measuring against that goal, there are things that are outside of our control in delivering on that. So I don't know how that affects, how we position that goal.
And when we get to that side, when we're looking at some of the metrics of success, we have focused it more on capturing what type of engagement we are doing, because that is more within our control. Who are we talking to? What types of resources and education are we providing? And so really capturing that work and making sure that we are playing that educator role in terms of the importance of maintaining affordability, but understanding that the actual decision of whether the subsidies remain or a new state subsidy is added, that is outside of our control.
So I guess it's just, maybe it's the verb I'm having a tough time with, if there's a.
Try to shift that a little bit more to what's within Pennie's control.
Yeah, I don't mind, that's just.
This is Joel. I agree completely. I was kind of couldn't think quickly enough as to what that might be. And I jotted maybe advocate for more affordable, something that reflects exactly as you said, what's within our control. It doesn't grab things that are not.
Yeah,
We could turn it into.
I think, and I think the way you described it.
We could turn
is
into
a
an
little bit different than
education,
number 4.
educate on the need for, more affordability or something like that, because we try to be very careful not being a political organization, not kind of delving into the advocacy role, being much more technical assistance and educator focused. So we could kind of shift that.
It makes the insurance department.
We
don't want that.
Those folks over there can't keep coverage affordable. Yeah, we could please look at how we can rephrase.
Now into the initiatives for each one. Right.
So looking at our first goal, being a trusted and objective source of information, we have listed out 2 outcomes here, and they specifically are tying to the initiatives that we are looking at, again, for this year. So the first outcome that we would really be looking to to move the needle in would be mitigating disruption as fully as possible for consumers experiencing program changes. And you can see there the first strategic initiative is really centered around the enhanced premium tax credits. And so again, we're going to dive into a little bit more detail in some later slides around the contingency planning that's occurring. But it is our responsibility to make sure that we have a plan in place for systematic changes that would be needed, but also to play that educational role for consumers around what is happening. And so, part of this is outside of our control, whether they continue or not, but we feel that what is within our control is having a strong contingency plan, looking at the number of communications we're doing to consumers, how we're communicating, and what the user experience is, and helping to kind of navigate this change. So when we've been talking about it internally, we understand there may be people who have to disenroll or enroll down to a different metal level because of the decreased affordability. But what we don't want is people disenrolling because they don't know what's happening. We feel like that would be something that's our responsibility to ensure that they understand why this is happening, and that they can come in and actively shop for a different plan that maybe fits within their budget. The second outcome that we have targeted for this year under the first goal is looking at improving the quality of our program. And this is very aspirational, but striving towards 100% accuracy and consistency with all processes and work product. So again, in the vein of trying to be as accurate and consistent as possible to improve how trusted we are as an organization, what we have listed out here is looking at that consumer escalations and appeals process. We talked a little bit about that in the 2024 review. That work will be ongoing just because of the amount of consumers and the amount of hearings that we have had come through that process. We think that that's a really big impact point and a way that we can ensure that people have really accurate information up front to decide whether they should be going through the appeal process or whether it's something that can be handled through an informal resolution. These are the two strategic initiatives that we've called out for the board level. I do just want to call out below there are definitely other operational initiatives that we would be working on with the team more internally to improve the quality of the program. So we have kind of for our own planning, looking at standardizing some of our internal procedures to make sure, again, what the call center is saying, what our website is saying, what other resources, it's all consistent and it's all completely accurate. And then we're also looking at just refreshing, again, some of those resources like FAQs and different content that we have kind of publicly available to help people navigate our program.
Hoping that we're successful in some of the comment letter responses, but if not, I think we also, in that education aspect of things and the consumer experience piece, if that $5 rule goes through, I think that's another piece that we would need to add to some of these strategic initiatives, because I think that will be also imperative to help make sure consumers understand what is happening, why, and what they need to do in order to maintain a lower premium.
I will say definitely based on the prior conversation, anything that would be codified in a final rule would definitely need to make sure that we're planning out how that's communicated and how people are kept apprised of what options they have. Moving then to our second goal, which is looking at accessibility and simplicity with our processes. So we have two outcomes listed here and a couple of strategic initiatives as well. The first is looking at reducing the consumer burden with processes by 50% while maintaining procedural integrity. So again, aspirational, but really trying to drive the team to think about how can we still maintain the integrity of the process, but reduce the steps for consumers to make sure that they can get enrolled and maintain their enrollment. It could be reduction in steps. It could also be reduction in time that the consumer has to spend verifying income or other important processes that we have at Pennie. So we have listed out here. Oh, let me also mention the second then outcome is improving the understandability of the Pennie program. So I think that really ties in with the education piece as well. And so we have two strategic initiatives that kind of support those two outcomes that we're working on. The first is implementing the labor and industry income verification process. So this is a project that we had brought to you all last year with the charging of using Equifax for looking at the income data matching inconsistencies. The team has been working with labor and industry to add an additional source of verifying that income. And so where we're looking at how this would help achieve those outcomes, we expect there would be reduced number of consumers who would need to verify their income, because with this additional source, we would be able to do that automatically through our own processes. And so there's some reduction in time that consumers need to spend, obviously, going through and verifying that. There's also some cost efficiencies from our perspective. And then the other kind of board level initiative that we have called out is the featured plan display proposal that we also brought to you all last year. The team has been working to really plan out the implementation of that and looking at how we're going to measure success on that initiative. And so we will be bringing proposed metrics back to you all, I think in the May meeting.
And I think we're going to share those actually probably outside of board meetings for review, because it'll be just for people to kind of independently review, and then potentially for discussion or sort of just going through that process. But we are planning to share the proposed metrics with everyone to see if there's any gaps or anything else that you all would be looking for.
This is Cheryl. How did you come up with 50%? Just picked a number, or, I mean, do you know that processes can be that efficient, or?
I don't know, Deb, if you want to share.
Yeah, because I think that is intended to be aspirational. So like basically cutting processes in half. And I think we expect that not every process is going to be able to be cut in half, but sort of having that be the goal of like trying to get there. And if we are able to decrease steps by 20%, that's great. It's kind of the journey's the important part, but kind of striving towards something aspirational. Like 100% accuracy is also going to be tough, but we thought that was the best thing to strive for, so that we're really, being very thorough, very detail oriented to really try to get us to that point where we can look at a process and say, that we do think that one needs it, and then try to repeat that across others. So it was really something that can be feasible with some processes, but also aspirational in others. But we thought that would be a good, essentially sort of like the cutting things in half type approach, cutting the number of steps in half.
Should it say then by up to 50%? The 100% said nearly 100% or something. I guess it's not that big of a deal, but if you hit 20%, you've not met your goal. You're out.
Yeah, I think the idea is like this helps us to identify what we think we could get step reductions in, and then some will be less than that, and that's still an accomplishment in that we reduce steps for that process. So it's intended to sort of be that motivating process of trying to reach something like that, but some processes are not going to be able to hit it. I think we would still see success in the fact that we took a process that was 10 steps and now it's 7 steps, even if it's not 5.
This is Carl. I don't really have an issue with the benchmark, but do you have a sense of what particular procedures, like, do you see as like a next step from this, like what procedures you want to focus in on and in what order? So if we say reducing customer burden, the information from L&I will certainly help with that. I imagine there are other things that falls under that scope. I wouldn't call it a mismatch between the strategic initiatives and the outcome you want to drive. It's just, there's probably a whole world of things that fits under one. And I'm interested to know how you're thinking about how to get there.
So, and this may also, again, kind of the strategic initiatives we've called out here more board level for discussion. We have listed out there some of the other operational initiatives that we would be looking at, which also will tie to these outcomes. So one of the things on there is identifying a consumer process that we, again, think has extraneous steps right now. And maybe there are some inefficiencies because it crosses over program areas. And so identifying that one process and kind of mapping it out end to end, and then being able to reduce those steps and look at that that's part of the, I guess, initiative that we would be doing internally is identifying some of those high impact processes and then starting to.
Yeah, I think it's intended to reflect that our goal is to constantly make things more accurate and consistent while also reducing the number of steps. So we kind of see these goals paired together of like, that's the high level of trust and consumer service that we are striving to have, is that it's accurate, it's complete, and it's in as few steps as possible while maintaining the required things that we have to do. So maintaining parliamentary.
This is Amy from HLP. This is not really board level like strategic initiatives, but in the other operational initiatives, something to consider is the appeals process, which the last time I know there's been some effort to sort of reduce the number of invalid appeals or things that can be resolved in other ways. And some work may have been done on this, but I know that Pennie doesn't have as much control of this, but I know the communications coming out of the office that does the appeals are not remotely consumer friendly. And I think, and pretty burdensome and actually quite frightening, I think, because it's very legalistic. So anything that can be done to sort of make that also a smoother process for people. I think that might actually lower. Like I think it's very possible some people abandon appeals when they see how complicated the notices are they get about what the appeals process is. Once they've appealed.
This is Rob. So that is the next step after invalid is we're really going to look at the informal resolution process. So you're 100% correct. There's a lot of legalese and it's very intimidating. So what our goal is to try to negate the need for as many hearings as possible by being able to resolve it upfront through the informal resolution process. We do have to have some language included because it's statutory requirements. So we do have to have certain, references to regulations in there. But we do think that we could probably not necessarily bury it, but put it lower on the area so that like the front page is less intimidating. It really explains what the next steps in the process are and does a better job of educating the consumer about what their role is going through this appeals process. So we are going to look into that right after we wrap up the invalid appeals process and start that transition. We're really going to start focusing on informal resolutions, which we hope to make some improvements there. The one thing I would note, we do still need to have the citations and things like that. So we would still have to have those somewhere in the document, but is there a way that we can make it much more consumer friendly and less intimidating so that they aren't? And then the other thing we're thinking about too is what other educational materials on the website would make more sense for how you're going along in the appeals process so that it's not as daunting because it's, our legal team is the nicest group of people you will find, but it's probably very intimidating if you end up at a hearing and there's an attorney on the other side and you're pro se. So we want to make sure that they understand what their full rights are going into it, try to make it so that it's as intuitive as possible so that it is less intimidating for those customers that do end up at an appeal or even a hearing.
Right. Yeah, and I think to the extent you can influence what the Department of State hearing office sends out to people, because that is actually unnecessarily intimidating.
And my office has worked together with the Department of State, and time to time we update the notices. Since I think 2023, we've updated a few of the documents just because we found them not very clear, and we can keep working on that. What I'm very grateful for my office is that the hearing examiners actually talk about how our office really tries to work with pro se to explain a very complicated and legal process that is the appeal process to someone who doesn't have any experience with insurance. Many times the chief hearing examiner has said how Pennie works really hard to guide the consumer through each process, explain why the process is taking place, and try to find a solution even before the hearing so the consumer doesn't have to go through that process. But we will continue to look at the notices and see what we can do to fix them and make them easier to read.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like you do. I just wanted to put a pin on that in that because of the operational processes here. I think appeals sometimes aren't.
Oh, 100% agree. I think that's great feedback.
I think that's an example. If we can move something, take a certain problem that we see recurring that goes to appeals, if we can determine a solution that we can do through informal resolution, or even at the call center, the call center rep position, where we can identify it clearly enough and there's a clear enough outcome. And then you've got the steps by more than 50%. You've got from like 6 steps to 1 step. So I think that's the type of opportunity we're looking for when we look at a goal like the simplifying, or where are there ways that we can just really shorten. And we think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of, like, might be kind of narrow in scope of the things we look at, but I think will always be those areas where we can look and say, we just not even have them have to go down those other 5 steps into the confusing notices if we can address a problem on step 1 or step 2.
I wanted to add that I guess to this point, maybe at some future date, when we've fully fleshed this out more thoroughly, just hearing where it's been settled, the desire is to go, and or what you might have as a hierarchy of prioritization in that. Because what you prioritize in those processes will deliver benefits for potentially different kinds of people, and people can quibble over which one you should do first and which one you should do second. And I feel like that's not for today, but it is of interest to me, and I imagine others.
This is Mike, and I mean, I think to Cheryl's point, maybe taking a step, I'd almost get rid of the metric and the outcome entirely. Like, I think it's good reporting for you to do to us, to keep us apprised of kind of where we're going in terms of reducing. But I feel like 50%, I mean, it's hard to achieve and arbitrary and maybe even more complicated by the reg. If the federal reg passes, there's going to be more process at Penn. So, I mean, there may be more time, there may be more steps that we have to build it. So I feel like it's harder on you than I would be. And I don't know if the board would feel differently, but I'd be fine with, I mean, the first outcome we'd like you to focus on reducing consumer burden with processes while maintaining procedural integrity, and still reporting to us on what you're doing in those 2 spaces, but not holding yourself to 50% reduction in time or process.
This is Joel. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I agree with that, particularly because here you're talking strategy. Your tactics, your lower, those goals, they can be set out somewhere else. But this is an aspirational strategy, keeping it at the level that Mr. just said. I think makes a lot more sense and gives you the ability to kind of move underneath it.
It's Alexis. I was just going to say you could add, with measurable progress, knowing that you're going to, that's kind of your commitment to come back and say, we decided on this area and here's how we're going to measure our progress. Yeah. So it's not getting into specifics, but it is having the commitment to.
I think it's fair.
Yeah, I think that's helpful feedback. And I think we also, when we were having internal conversations, were between trying to get some type of quantifiable metrics as well as qualitative. I think, we, over the years, were in startup mode and, trying to react to everything that was really coming out of the federal government. And so we're now kind of at a point, especially establishing that vision moving forward, to say, all right, let's start really establishing baselines for where we currently are with our program, with our processes, and then how do we, like you were saying, Alexis, almost make measurable improvements in those areas. So I think, we wouldn't lose the intention of the outcome by removing the 50%, but really, and maybe once we do establish those baselines, could come back with a little bit more, informed metric for how we want to decrease it.
Be less aspirational is what I'm hearing.
One of the other things I wanted to call out, I think it also goes, Amy, to maybe your point, is under the operational initiatives, the plain language initiative that we've been working on. That is a top priority for us, is establishing plain language guidance and guidelines and going through all of our highly used resources. And I think eventually every resource that is out on our website and used by the team, to make sure that it is in that very clear language that it can be understood and almost reacted to by consumers. And so that is something, again, we haven't called out at like board level, but it is work that we're doing internally to look at every resource and help achieve that understandability outcome. All right, moving then to our third goal, which is the increase awareness goal. So as I mentioned, we did surveying and found that currently our awareness is at about 30%. And so the outcome, again, trying to tie a quantitative metric to it, is trying to improve awareness of the program by 10 percentage points, so 30% to 40% by the end of 2026. And the way that we would try to achieve this is through our awareness campaigns with our marketing and outreach, and using the survey results, focus groups, all the information that we really have at our disposal to ensure that we are using diverse and targeted tactics to really reach those individuals. So that, I think Chachi might dive into a little bit more around, how we're going to be looking at doing that. But that would be one tool that we have to really increase awareness. And then the second tool would be looking at our outreach function and really through our assister network. And so increasing our presence and assistance across the Commonwealth, and making sure that we have different partner organizations, making sure that consumers, if they're looking for that free assistance to get through the application process and maintain coverage, that is very readily accessible.
Three.
Joel, same comment as far as the having a hard goal in there. I'm not sure I have an opinion one way or the other on the number, but if you keep it at a high level, materially improve awareness, something like that, and keep your tactics and your actual goals underneath that, seems to make more sense to me.
Right. And then that takes us to our final goal, which is focused on affordability. And so within this goal, we have two outcomes, and they are more education focused because that is our function. And so the first outcome is educating on the need to preserve existing federal financial assistance for consumers. The second is educating on the need to implement new state financial assistance for consumers. Again, both in the effort to make coverage more affordable. The initiatives that we have listed out here are the education initiatives, but also the engagement. So specifically for the enhanced premium tax credits, we've been doing very proactive engagement with federal lawmakers, even talking with state lawmakers about what the impact would be to Pennsylvanians if these enhanced premium tax credits were to go away. We've done proactive outreach to other stakeholder groups within the Commonwealth that may have members or interact with different consumers as well that would be impacted by this, and trying to share information, share data, share resources as much as we can, so that they can be using that to inform their conversations or any efforts that they're doing. So that would be the main source of measuring success on this, is the work that we're doing to really raise awareness. We also have called out in here, obviously, a success would be extension of the EPTCs, noting though that is outside of our control. For the second one, the state assistance, it's kind of the same thing, proactively engaging state lawmakers, proactive outreach to other stakeholder groups, and really building the case for the need for state investment in health insurance for its residents.
Mike, again, here, I think we'd revise the goal language slightly, so it's not make coverage affordable, as we discussed earlier, about kind of educating about these opportunities. One area I think, and maybe this is something for Anna to take back, I'm not sure where there's a line with educating versus lobbying in terms of engaging, because I think we need to stay out of lobbying per se.
Definitely, and that has been what we've been doing and the advice that we keep following. We are here to educate people and inform people of what could potentially happen. And that's where the limit is.
There's been a lot of discussion at the state exchange director group as well. And I think generally where the line, at least that's been discussed in that group, is, educating about the impact, going into like, we think people should go call their congressperson is sort of the step too far, for example. Sort of that's where it gets into like full on advocacy versus sort of this is the impact, here's the analysis, because we have the data, we have the fullest picture of what that impact's going to be. And, think there's a strong role for us to share that and make sure everyone else has that information as well. But I think just, talking generally from those conversations, that's sort of been the line that a lot of people have sort of coalesced around of like providing the information as visibly as possible, but stopping short of encouraging or, kind of promoting action with the public.
Anybody else, any thoughts?
Alexis, I mean, from an outcome perspective, it seems like we also have to work within the parameters. We have to be successful within the parameters or the hand that we're dealt to. So it's like, try to change it, at the federal level, try to change it at the state level, and then how do we make the best of what we have? I feel like I just depressed the group, but
I think we try to tie that in with the first goal of whatever happens, try to, at a minimum, make it very clear what's happening to minimize disruption due to lack of awareness or lack of understanding of what's happening. So there's going to be, if premiums increase, there's going to be disruption. But if people understand they have to take action or have looked at a plan and can't find one, that's better than someone never looking and just not paying and dropping the coverage. It's, trying to get someone to come back in and at least look at their plan options so we know they've attempted to find a way to stay covered. If it still is that they can't find anything, then, I think in that part, that would be from what we can do a success in that they took the action that they could take, which was to come and look at other options. And ultimately, whether they're able to make that work or not is up to them. That's going to have to be.
Any other thoughts on strategic goals?
So this is Cheryl, just going back to your comment, excuse me. What should goal 4 be? I agree it doesn't fit make coverage affordable, but what does make sense?
Written down something like educate on impact and importance of affordability, or ensure awareness of the impact and importance of affordability. 2 different options there. Increase awareness.
I like having educate just because we don't have educate in any of the other goals. And I do think that's a really key function of the exchange. So I think turning that into more with the education lens around the importance of affordability.
That makes sense. And I don't know that we need to, I know we need to approve the strategic goals, but I don't know that we need to wordsmith for today. I think we could conceptually approve. The first 3, I think, are all where we were comfortable. We changed a couple tactics within 2, but I don't think we changed the language of 2. So I think we could still conceptually approve the 2025 strategic goals. With the understanding that you'll revise 4 to come back with more of an educational approach versus the make coverage more affordable approach. Are we comfortable leaving some flexibility on language for the 4th? Okay. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the strategic goals with the understanding that be revised to focus on education of affordability. We have a motion. Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously, and we will roll, I think, right into the,
There's one more, we're going to do a quick update on where we are with a couple of the strategic initiatives. This will just take a minute and then we'll right into the contingency.
Okay. Yep, I see it. So Rob, I think this is you then.
Yep. So to start with kind of our key initiatives for 2025, and some of these all of these we've actually discussed last year and are pretty much a continuation. So to start with the state affordability program, the good news is functionality is deployed, it's ready. We have fully tested it internally. So it's pretty much ready for implementation, or at least on that side. The one thing that we have remaining to complete is we have scheduled insurer testing in the test environment for April and May. So basically a 6-week window that we have to fully test it to make sure the insurers are able to ingest the necessary information, populate the notices as necessary. And then at that point, once we've completed that testing, it should be good to go for when we do receive funding. So any questions on state affordability? For featured plan display, if you recall, we talked about this during, I believe, the October or maybe the August meeting last year. Essentially, we have drafted the evaluation metrics. We're still tweaking them a little bit, but we're going to send those out to the board within the next month or so. So they'll be for your review. As Mike mentioned, it would essentially be Anna-Paulina and Devin. If you could comment back to them if you have any tweaks that you wanted or any information about the metrics. Additionally, we are going to be conducting focus groups. So we have a focus group scheduled for really early to mid-May. And what they will be doing is walking through a prototype of the filtering system that is the featured plan display. So they won't be in the system itself because that won't be ready at that point, but they will be able to walk through, navigate it, see if there's any feedback, see if there's any tweaks that they need. And then also we will gauge their understanding of what the tool is meant to do, and then how successful it is, at least in the prototype phase. The filter will ultimately be deployed ahead of plan preview for plan year 2026. And customers would see it for the first time live on November 1st. So at the very opening of open enrollment 2026 is when they're for the first time in anonymous shopping, or if they're going to enroll, see this featured plan display selection itself.
Rob, who's the focus group? Is it consumers? Is it
It's
brokers?
consumers.
Okay.
Colleen, what's the demographic makeup of that? Like, do you have a?
Not specifically, but they will have to have shopped for health insurance at some point.
Through Pennie.
No, just
In
shop
general.
Yeah, just shop in general.
Okay. And when you say consumers, they're consumers, individual consumers, or they are just so that it would exclude anybody that gets their coverage through an employer?
Exactly. Well, if they get their coverage through their employer now, but they have shopped in the past, they would technically be eligible. Just having that experience, we wouldn't want to have somebody that has only gotten their insurance from their employer. That way we can at least get the feedback from somebody that's gone through the process themselves.
And I guess I think the demographics are important on this one, though, just because, what is someone's comfort level with technology and shopping, understanding they may have shopped using a broker, right? Or someone else that's assisted them through the process. So I think that would be important to understand what the ultimate demographic makeup is.
How do we get them? Just procedurally, how do you?
We've got through our creative service vendor, and they already have kind of a network of folks that they're able to access for surveying, folks that have signed up for it, but it's also being word of mouth.
And we've used them for focus groups before. So those were really interesting, and they've been able to kind of deep dives with elicit perceptions on insurance and things like that. In a couple of years, they did some of those. So they've sort of done this type of bringing together consumers and facilitating focus groups.
And it's just, to Colleen's point, it's a diverse group. You've got age ranges all over the place.
That's what we'll target.
And the other thing, like with testing technology too, in the past, we've done it more so where you actually have them physically on hands and you're seeing like, where do they hover? Do they spend too much time? Are you realizing like from a true more user testing piece, is it actually working, right? Like in a focus group, people could say things or jump along with whatever anybody else in the room is saying. Is there going to be any testing that's done from a real usability perspective?
I don't think that we're going to be able to do that for this testing, but that could be something that we look forward to after it's been implemented and doing kind of another follow-up to it.
And there would be, it's like a halfway almost. So we're using pretty much a tool that would allow them to click through. So we'd still be able to try to gauge, like, are they getting stuck on something? But it's dummy data and it's not the actual system itself. It's just a prototype mock-up. So it gets you kind of halfway there where we actually could get them in it and navigating it around rather than just following someone on the screen. But it's not going to be as robust as you would get with actual system testing.
This is Cheryl. Is this the thing we talked about where you could people can opt out of it?
Yep.
Okay. Just especially since we're not going to really be testing the real thing before it goes live. I mean, I think being able to opt out is important.
Yeah, I think the discussion we had last year was really around making sure people, when they come in, would be able to understand that dynamic of what filter is on and how to remove that filter if they want to see all the plans. So that's the intent of this, is to sort of see how clear is it that that's what's being presented to them and that they have other options would be the intent of this one. And then I think we, in our evaluation, our proposed metrics, we're also proposing doing a couple other types of focus groups kind of throughout at different stages to get understanding from, people, this initial one before it's implemented, but then even after it's implemented, get more feedback too.
This is Amy. Can you explain a little bit why you're only using people who in the group who have experience shopping as opposed to, somebody who's never shopped might have a completely different understanding of this? Why we wouldn't also want to see that?
Yeah, this is Chachi. Yeah, we'll mostly focus more toward like uninsured or shopped. So it'll be kind of a mix of the two.
Oh, so it's not just people who.
Not just people that have shopped. Yeah, I'm sorry. That
Okay.
I kind of made up. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we'll consistently aim to get uninsured or folks that have never shopped, but you could cast a little bit of a wider net of reaching participants if you also include folks that have shopped.
Thank you.
Mhm.
To Alexis, I'm just wondering, I mean, Devin, we were talking at lunch, how many people are going to be shopping now? Is there any concern that the feature element is going to add more confusion to an otherwise different shopping experience? Maybe not. Maybe it'll help. I've just wanted to put it out there.
I mean, if it's based on the original genesis of the policy that people are overwhelmed with plans, it could help in some way. And then also just a reminder, in many counties, this is not an issue. Like there are only certain counties that really have significant, 70, 80, 90 number, plans that could see a benefit from having the filter. So I think it wouldn't also be that significant of a change for everyone, but it would be probably, I mean, the intent is for it to be helpful for those areas that have so many. And I think if people are going in and trying to switch their plans and are already confused by why their premium went up and all of that, this actually could be a good time to have this in place to help simplify some of that process for them.
This is Cheryl. Is there no way to be able to test it, the real thing, before it's implemented, given how critical it is that we're going to be filtering out plans for folks? I mean, it just seems to me like we should know if there's any glitches before it actually goes live.
So that consumer testing is to kind of get a feel for how understandable it is. There will be robust testing in addition. So we'll do testing. It'll be available during plan preview. So that will serve as another.
So it wouldn't be necessarily consumer-based UAT, but it would be our team will test it internally. The insurers would also see it during plan preview, and they're going to be signing off on it as well. And the reason that it's just to get it ahead of open enrollment. It's a kind of quick turnaround time on a release schedule, right? So that's why that's why we have to do the prototype rather than actually use consumer-based testing. And then the final thing, just for background story on labor and industry quarterly wage data, So if you recall, last May, we had to vote to appropriate some funds for VCI/Equifax, which is our secondary income check. So if someone is not able to be verified by IRS sources, their income is outside the threshold or not returned, we currently use Equifax as our secondary source. That used to be provided to us by CMS for free, but they did institute a fee recently, back in July. And they also have an administrative cost on top of the fee just for the service itself. So we've been exploring how to use an alternative secondary source of income. Luckily, our friends over at Labor and Industry, they have a solution for us. So we are able to access wage data from Pennsylvania employees. And we have all the system requirements in place. They are with Get Insured right now, who's working on it. And we expect to have this change implemented ahead of open enrollment for 2026. The good news is, I guess, so with Equifax, the good news was that it was slightly under cost for what we thought it would be. It's roughly around $300,000 we've spent since July on this. So it's not as high as we thought it would be originally. The bad news is it is still a large cost. We think it's an unnecessary cost. And we also know that the fee to actually utilize this source is going to continue to grow year over year and actually double within the next 5 years. So we do think that this labor and industry data is going to provide us pretty much equivalent service than what we're getting with Equifax, but we're probably going to save about $1 million over the next 5 years in implementing this. And again, a lot of that goes to how strong of a working relationship we have with labor and industry. They've been very helpful with this, and they also don't charge us nearly as much as what we'd be charged for Equifax. So we are ready to deploy that. Well, we're working on getting ready to deploy that ahead of open enrollment 2026. We will be able to test it and make sure it's working properly before auto renewals. And then at that point, after it'll be deployed for 2026, but before then, in May of this year, we're probably going to want to have a discussion, get an update on where we stand with the actual requirements being deployed, and then also make a determination when we should probably cut off Equifax if we do choose to go that route. Again, the cost savings are pretty substantial here for labor and industry, and we do think there would even be some fringe customers that otherwise wouldn't be verified by Equifax who might be verified by labor and industry wage data. So we think this will be a very consumer-friendly approach to helping resolve income inconsistencies. And we also think this will be even more necessary now if this proposed rule does go into effect, because a lot of the rules do speak towards income verification. Any questions on labor and industry wage data?
Okay. Hearing none. Now I think we move into the
All right, so we wanted to talk about a couple of different, just a sort of preliminary planning on if the enhanced premium tax credits go away. I think our plan is to kind of introduce some topics now, and then at each subsequent meeting, bring more details because we will know more every meeting we get through the year. So if it looks like they have not been extended yet for the May meeting, we'll bring the next level of detail, and then same with August. I think we might have an idea at that point what's going to happen, or at least we'll know more about the timing at that point. So today we wanted to talk about, with that uncertainty, just sort of what that could mean from a systems perspective, but also consumer messaging and starting to think about that. And we also wanted to kind of tee up the types of budget decisions that we would be facing should they go away and should our budget drop. So not, for decision today, but really just kind of starting to get the wheels turning, because if enrollment drops and our budget decreases, that will require some tough decisions on the financial side. So first, I'm going to turn it back to Rob to talk about system impacts.
Sure. So in terms of the system changes that would be required for EPDC if it were to expire, those are not actually too onerous. It's relatively straightforward for us to convert back to the initial APTC calculations. Where the confusion comes from, or where there's kind of complications, is we have to very thoroughly test it to make sure that there is no issues with regression. So essentially, our internal testing team would have to focus on the accuracy of APTC calculations to make sure that they are just using the previous APTC criteria. And we would have to pretty much test every type of household composition, household income layout that you could think of. So it's a very robust testing that is required. Essentially, what we would be targeting is we probably need to have a decision to make the change within the system to revert back to previous APTC calculations, really by early August, maybe late July. The reason being just to make sure we have enough of a window for that testing. What we would essentially do is disable EPTC at that point if we had not seen any indications from Congress that they were going to extend the EPTCs so that we were ready ahead of auto renewals. Where it could get confusing is we do have to kind of account for any possible scenario. So even if it's September and EPTCs have not been extended, hypothetically, they could be extended in December, right after we've done auto renewals, or even next year and implement them retroactively. Each of those possible scenarios we are developing contingency plans for, but each of those does add complications and it does require more robust testing based off what would actually be the layout. So what we would probably be targeting is hopefully they get extended. This is all moot. If they are not extended, we would probably be turning back to the regular APTC calculation in early August ahead of auto renewals, and we would just maintain a readiness position to implement any changes if Congress does end up extending APTC. The other thing worth noting is we would have to evaluate again, and we are doing this as part of our contingency planning, we would have to finalize what our evaluation would be for the impacts to state affordability. So the state affordability statute, it has designated criteria for who would be eligible for the state subsidy. However, should EPTCs expire, we might need to evaluate on whether or not that criteria is still what we want, because we might have to go sub 150% FPL, and we might have to make those changes. So essentially, we just want to flag that we would have to do further evaluations based off what the landscape ends up being with enhanced premium tax credits, because they could expire, or there could be kind of a hybrid where it's only a limited EPTC is extended or something like that. So we would need to be ready. We are doing contingency plans, but we would have to complete an evaluation once we do get that final determination.
This is Joel. So what's the impact on the insurers? You're preparing all these different contingencies. So one day you're going to flip a switch and go, hey, we're taking route A. Assuming the insurers have to be prepared for that in some way. I'm not close enough to understand it, but.
So the biggest headache for insurers is probably rate filing. Because it's almost, you'd have to file two different types of rates, because it would be if there's EPTCs or if there's not. So that.
Good news, we've already been asked.
Yes. Well, so the good news is that request has been made, I guess.
But I'd say there's another impact, and that would directly affect the consumer too, because the other piece of it is that we won't have that updated APTC information. You know, the way that timelines work and when we're supposed to provide renewal notices, which if you don't have the updated APTC information, you're supposed to use the current year's data as the placeholder. And this is going to be significantly different, right? So, you know, I think back to the goals and what are we going to do and how are we going to handle this? If there's a requirement, like I think in the past, I know Independence has asked and we've been given the okay to send a preliminary notice, but we don't include the rate information in it and follow up when we have the updated rate information, because we don't want a consumer to get something in their hands, even though it's disclaimed that says this isn't your final number, and it to be wildly different, right? To the point of passive renewals, you have a whole bunch of people that may pay attention to the first notice and nothing else after that, and it's got information that's not going to be financially, correct for them in the new year. So I think that is something we need to be proactive about. How are we going to handle and how's that going to be messaged? Because I think that in my mind is the biggest impact from a carrier perspective with the notification requirements that we have and the ultimate impact to the consumer.
I think that's an excellent call out, but the other system change, like the 834 is not going to be a major impact. So that, I think that is probably.
Right, it's just a different value.
Exactly. So I think that's a great call out. Is what the ultimate headache would be for both you and for us to make sure that we could align our messaging and educate the customers so they understand what this renewal means.
It goes by cycle, but so if you flip the switch August, what about for the people that are still enrolling for 25 for August?
No issue with anyone that would be in a 2025 enrollment. So even up through December, if they had a SAP and they were enrolling, it would be fine. It's basically we update a back-end table, which just gives the applicable household premium percentage, and we update that for the next plan year. So there's two tables concurrently running, one for 2026, one for 2025. 2025 would not be impacted by it.
I guess it goes here. If
Yes.
if I'm enrolling in November for 25, like my premiums would be hugely different for 2 months versus next year. So we'll have to figure out how you explain that.
I think that might be the perfect transition to the next slide, right? Because Yeah.
Let's not go there yet.
Yeah, just one quick comment. It sounds like the assumption is extended, not extended. What about altered?
And that's where, so we would have to do further evaluation on that. We're trying our best for contingency planning, but without knowing what the framework would look like, it's a shot in the dark, it's a guess, right? Because we want to know if it's like, for instance, it could be everyone over 400% now is eligible for a BPTC, or they're not, and it's only, 250% or below. So we are trying to maintain readiness to be able to update the tables and do whatever we need to. But there's so many different variables for what it could end up being, and we don't have the framework, that it's almost going to be dependent on what the actual final, determination ends up being. And I think that it's worth mentioning again, even if these expire after 2025, we could be in May of 2026 hypothetically, and all of a sudden get EBTC again that we have to retroactively apply back to January 1st. So we are trying to make a contingency plan for all these potential scenarios, but it's very hard to predict when there are so many different options that could be the ultimate determination.
Then we also wanted to talk about kind of two different veins of education. One specifically about them expiring, and then also just sort of a broader approach for this year that could kind of work in either scenario. So Chachi.
Yeah, sure. Chachi, so with the unclarity with the enhanced tax credits, we're proposing to communicate with customers as early as we can. We're thinking that could be as early as July with either a postcard or an enveloped letter. The vast majority of customers, do not know that this is coming for 2026. 3/4 of our customers have only experienced these enhanced tax credits. So just kind of tying it back to that goal of being a trusted source for coverage. I think that being clear and frequent with our messaging is going to help us get ahead of it so that they understand why this is happening, what the impact could be to them, how the expiration will affect them. So the messaging, as we've talked about before, like what's our line, it's going to be, to explain that, the tax credits are tied to federal funding and a federal law, that the law has expired, and and how that's going to potentially impact their premiums in 2026. So we're thinking mailing something out in sometime in the summer, but obviously want to open it up for the board for discussions and how comfortable everyone is with that timeline, because the closer that we get, I think that Colleen kind of mentioned, is where we start getting into, if they only see that eligibility notice, we could be looking at, shifting, something changes after that eligibility notice, or that being our only shot at receiving folks. And then we've got, then I think that we lose kind of that credibility on being a trusted source. So it's thinking a postcard, something that really kind of can't be ignored, very high level messaging there. Could also do, and it could be an and/or, doing an envelope letter that kind of gets a little bit more specific, but still not as specific as this is what you would, like an actual notice, giving an actual quote. We would be able to put some QR codes on there to be able to kind of track effectiveness. Especially in mailing, it's very hard to track it, but QR code would certainly help. And then we would boost that with emails, text messages, website landing pages, calculators, FAQs, so that if they got that postcard, they got that envelope, they're able to kind of dig in and learn a little bit more. So that's kind of the discussion I wanted to open up is how comfortable we are getting that messaging out as early as the summer.
This is Antoinette. Can I just jump in and ask a question? Are we in a message test or focus group or anything? I think this is very sensitive. So I think we do need to communicate to folks sooner rather than later, but I also know it's going to cause mass panic at the point someone receives something. And we don't want them dropping coverage prematurely or not understanding maybe they can switch metal levels. Like, what are we thinking about how we get this right? Like, can we work with assisters? Like, just trying to think like how we really hone the message so we can keep as many people as possible.
Yeah, we have a lot of options there on the messaging side. We could do focus groups with our assisters. We could do a quick digital survey to understand the messaging for consumers as well. We've got we have already done some cost surveys and understand that about 80% would either, if costs were to go up, would change their metal level or look for different coverage, or drop coverage altogether, kind of looking both of those together. So yeah, answer that. That's a good point.
Carl, so if you were to mail in the summer, what would you be willing to say that if something doesn't happen, if Congress doesn't do something, your credit may change significantly? I can't quite figure out like what the right message would be, because I've heard on the one hand, you know, you don't want to say call your congressman, but ultimately Congress is the decision maker. Where does the line get drawn, and what are you willing to say?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I want to wordsmith too much right now. We would definitely, you know, make sure that we're riding the line legally, and then also, but I think that it would be, you know, starting in 2026, your current premium will not be impacted for 2025. That with if this law were to, it's set to expire at the end of 2025, without federal action, you know, your premiums, your savings will decrease, your premium will increase.
It's tough. Okay,
Yeah.
but it sounds like you would want to say something along the lines
Your
of
costs will go up.
Congress does have to act. That's still the message that you want to get in there.
See,
Okay.
I think it's more pay attention to what's coming. So there are likely changes coming that are going to impact you.
Yeah.
You'll get information as soon as we get it. And, you know, here's the rough timeline you can expect. So you're going to want to pay attention. Like, to me, that's at the point we would be at. I mean, they can certainly give, you know, their congressman grief too, but I just feel like that's what you want them to get out of this, is that they know they have to pay attention. We want them to act.
That's a good point.
And I agree with that completely.
So Dr. Conte, and to that point, is August too late? Right? Are there opportunities for that? Hey, we just want you to be aware of what's coming even earlier
I think
without
you said
inciting
July.
panic.
Yeah, I said as early, you know, as early as July. I mean, theoretically, we could turn a postcard around after the language is secured. We could turn around a postcard in 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could go as early as everyone is comfortable with. And if there's concerns budgetary wise, we had discussed this in October of setting aside, part of my budget right now is sending letters and postcards for the procedurally termed from the rolling off of Medicaid, and then also those that are a little further along in their SAP there. So we would kind of halt that messaging and use those funds for these direct messages to customers. We would stop our current mailings and go that route. So yeah, I mean, we could be much earlier, even from, you know, early summer or late spring.
This is Colleen. So what's the earliest this could be voted on? Do we know that answer? Like, because that's the other piece. If we have an answer, we may not like the answer, but we have an answer. I think the other piece that we have to talk about is it more than once? You know, we're talking about doing a mailing at this time, but if say we were to find out in April, how could we come up with a multi-touch campaign that ultimately?
Oh, that it's confirmed that it will be extended.
I think we're premature to send it.
Yeah.
I think you need to let federal budget reconciliation
Right.
play out for a period of time. Congress goes home in August. So I think we will know by August if it's looking one way or the other. Although the last time we had this extended, it was after August. But I think in the first year of an administration, the big budget is what's going to come through reconciliation and they'll build from there. I think we'll have a better idea. So I still like maybe midsummer. I wouldn't go as early as March. I wouldn't go as early as April. May is rate filing time. I mean, and I think to one of the points earlier, as much as it's very important to put numbers in the letter, I almost think you can. Because I don't know what number you would give, because if it's your premium's going to look like this next year, we have no idea what other filings are going to come in May. So if we have other companies coming in, going into new areas, dropping the second lowest silver plan, if we have current companies dropping new products, like that number is going to change substantially. So I almost think the message to Alexis's point is like, make sure you go on to Pennie when the time is right, because they're going to need to go in.
Yeah.
They're going to need to shop to see what the impact looks like, because the number could drastically change depending on if a company changes its footprint or its product offerings.
I would just add, like, once we do know, and if where things are in the fall, if it doesn't go the direction that we want, I think it needs to be more than mail and whatever. I think there needs to be media behind this and not advertising it, right? But like, how do you get on mass media, TV, radio, where people, yeah, exactly. Like where you're actually providing that thought leadership to help people understand this is what it means to you. This is how you shop. This is what you do. Like, 'cause that's what people will potentially pay more attention to, because we can't guarantee they're going to open their mail. And we also don't know that they still live where we're sending it to, because there's so much return mail. I think that's a significant issue too.
Yeah, definitely an earned media push.
And this is Shirley, after you drop the postcards, have your call center really prepared for a deluge and, prepared to give the right answers.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, before that would get dropped, customer service reps, assisters, brokers, the elected officials are all going to have their talking points.
Just thinking about, this is Tia, just thinking about the current strategy with communication. So earlier in the presentation, we talked about how the second lowest cost silver plan changed in rating area 2 and rating area 5. So there were significant costs. There was a significant cost increase in those two rating areas. Was there any communication about that was sent to those folks after the rates were approved and things went out?
We didn't do anything ahead of time, like we're talking like here, but
Right.
during open enrollment, we did do significant, like we did multiple emails, we did outbound, we tried to reach them many different ways to highlight that with the message of you can shop for something else and kind of pay attention.
But that
Your
didn't
plan.
start until open enrollment.
Right.
That's right.
Okay.
This would be sort of, because we did see that there was an impact on those rating areas. This would be sort of taking that lesson learned and saying, we have to do more earlier and more frequent, especially with how widespread this is going to be.
So then there is something, you do have experience then with significant changes in the market and knowing it's not great to wait until later.
This is Joel. I don't disagree with the August timeframe. But if you wait until then, you've made a conscious decision not to use a prior opportunity to educate people so they can be active with respect to their views of what may or may not happen in the And, you know, we had a discussion earlier about obviously the difference between education and advocacy. But sorry, I'm not drawing a conclusion here, but that's where I'm kind of struggling because there's a conscious decision to say, we're going to wait until something happens and then inform you versus we're going to inform you about something that might happen and now you know and you know what to do with it. Might want to do.
Yeah, it seems like, based on the lesson learned, that if we wait too late, we lose a lot of opportunity to get the education out and even setting like, we want to do 10 touches on this, or we feel like we have to do 10 touches through 5 different communication channels, something like that. I mean, that kind of necessitates us starting early enough. And if we say did a postcard in July where you read the postcard, even if you're throwing it out, like you can't help it. I feel like we all get the postcards, right? From different people advertising things. Like you can't help but read it. So, I mean, I think that's sort of a pay attention, your costs, we could say not exactly what amount, but we know everyone's going to see a cost increase or 99.9%, enough people that we can confidently say your costs are likely going to go up. You have to pay attention to this with some amount of background. So if they have that base education and they can kind of do with that what they will, and sort of that sets the foundation for building on that with additional communications. And maybe it's a letter and then maybe it's an email and then kind of being able to kind of space those out, build that awareness, starting perhaps as early as July, and then kind of once we get into closer to enrollment, then doing the media of when we know it's weeks away, kind of really trying to emphasize shop, and and then continue with our normal in open enrollment activity as well.
I think Joel's point though is if we tell them earlier enough, they have a horse in the race here, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it means a lot to them. We're not calling for advocacy, but I think informing people so that they actually have an opportunity to raise their voices, right? Who else is telling them? I don't know that they're necessarily connecting the dots to know the significant impact that this could have on them, their families, their financial, stability.
And regardless of environment, this can be something that we push out for following years, that midway through the year, a postcard is sent out to say, hey, open enrollment starting, or whatever the message might be. But just include this mid-year communication as part of the ongoing strategy. Whatever it says.
I'm hearing next week.
I mean, with that question, are you thinking like July would be what kind of earlier, June?
I'm thinking earlier.
May, June.
If that's you said it a lot better than I did, thank you. But if that's the direction we want to take, it'd have to be much earlier.
Okay.
Perhaps
Would
it's
that be
two
more of a
messages.
primer on what the tax credits are, how they form, that it will have an impact?
And Joel, and ultimately what the
That
result
it will
might be.
be,
Kind of like, we wanted to make you aware of a potential change. Here are the facts.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's educational.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
Without federal action, this is going to be the result.
And I don't think, we don't have numbers to give, but you certainly have potential impacts to people. Your rates could go up by X%,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I think people need to understand, this is significant.
Yeah, I think our affordability page could be a place for them
Yep.
to at least land and
Mhm.
understand the impacts, the numbers.
Yep.
Especially even by county on that affordability page of, what kind of increases they could see. And we necessarily don't have the calculator made, but I think KFF, Kaiser
Right.
Family,
Foundation.
there's some calculators that could at least give you a general idea of what your increase would be.
Are you
Okay,
able to put a link to that on your site or on our page?
Yeah, we could.
yeah, definitely consider it.
Any guess I'm hearing kind of a May-ish timeframe. Any concerns with that? Because if not, we can kind of move forward along that timeline with sort of a preliminary postcard type. These are the facts. Wanted you to be aware, since you get your coverage to us, we felt it important that you're aware of, what's percolating.
And then maybe late July, August can be
The next one.
all right. This did or didn't happen. Now, let me remind you
up
of
in-
things you have to pay attention.
Coming up in October, you'll receive this.
Yep.
Right, starting November, open enrollment.
Make sure you open everything from your insurance company you need to understand your impact.
Yeah, it could be laid out a little bit more specific.
And I would just, if you can share with the board and with other carriers as well that are in the market, I think they could help amplify the message as well. If you just receive, you may have received something from Pennie explaining this, there could be other things that carriers can do to help support the message as well. Obviously affects everybody in
The brokers and the system.
Yep.
Because, collectively, we've sent a letter to Congress. I think you've followed up with more relevant, recent information to Congress. I know you all put out an op-ed a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of them, focusing on what ARPA extension could mean. So, I think it's important to get the word out today. As they're starting to vote, it's just the numbers part, I think, is tricky. Because everything may change in May with what filings.
Yeah, and Colleen, you mentioned the PR side of it and getting this out to the press. I think that's what we get asked a lot whenever open enrollment's about to start and we're, pitching the fact that, hey, want to get the word out. Well, what's new this year is always the question back, instead of it just being kind of a rinse and repeat. And this is a big what's new that would garner a lot of media attention, I think.
I think that the other piece too is to the point of the rate filings, does it get mentioned there? And how much awareness are we creating in the press release that goes out every year
Right.
with, a lot of the press releases in the past, it's like, hey, we're touting, we have new carriers in the market. We're touting how much we were able to control the cost. I think we have to be realistic in that because that will get press as well and attention. And our main goal, I think, needs to be educated consumers this year about what they're facing.
Yeah, that was kind of the media plan this year was, up until January 1, the pivot was open enrollment. And then the pivot from our perspective was you go to ARPA. We didn't want to confuse the message during open enrollment, but now we're kind of in that space where leaning on Pennie and independently from it, want to continue to get that word out however we can.
Yeah, and we had some press pickup from the open enrollment, 500,000, but this is now at risk. And I think there was, from some of those discussions, even they're trying to figure out when the best time to cover some of this is. So I think trying to do the steady drumbeat and also kind of have that timing tied to something actionable as well, just to try to make sure that the awareness is feeding into that building awareness at the local level and directly through these types of notices. So I think this is really great direction. I think we will work on getting a postcard in the May timeframe, and then we can kind of build out a plan from there that we can bring back to the May meeting for the rest of it to kind of flush that out. But we can be working on the postcard in the meantime.
Postcard before May.
In May. Yeah, that timing works out. That'll be a good amount of time to prep, get all the wording right.
Good.
We could probably do some quick message testing on that as well with some sister groups or whoever is kind of willing to get that initial language right. Okay. Great. Any other thoughts or comments on that? Okay. So then we also, alongside that, wanted to talk a bit about, we've always focused in the past, lowest cost plans at highest quality has been kind of the tagline. The lowest cost, we're concerned about that not ringing or not resonating well this open enrollment. So wanting to shift even before open enrollment to more of a quality side, you know, because when you pay more for something, you're always asking, what do I get for it? And what we've seen is that there's some lack of education on what people are getting for it. So wanting to kind of build out that part. So Chachi, if you want to talk through.
Sure. So yeah, cost being an unknown again. Starting this month, we're kicking off a monthly email for all of our enrollees to just emphasize another value piece of the plans in which they're currently in. You know, the can't be denied coverage because of pre-existing conditions, the financial protections, the free preventative care, screenings, vaccines, that sort of thing, and letting them know reminding them what they purchased and what they're enrolled in. So we did a survey of enrollees, and 35% of current customers, only 35% of customers know of these guaranteed protections, whether it's financial, pre-existing conditions, and such. So that's pretty much our messaging strategy throughout the year to pair up with this awareness of what potentially could be coming down with the expiration of the enhanced tax credits. So it's going to be a year-long campaign. As we get more and more closer to open enrollment, that message gets a little bit more amplified of, remember, this is what you had for 2025. So whenever that decision comes, the dinner table discussion of, well, what are we getting with that health coverage versus other necessary needs? And if the cost is up, you know, do they decide to either keep that plan, you know, move within a metal level? And then also, as we get closer to open enrollment, really kind of creating some guides so that a customer could make that informed decision. So I'm picturing kind of a checklist. So if they decide to go outside the marketplace, they know what to look for in the plan that they're purchasing, and or ask about these certain things. Are there protections for these certain things? Is the preventative care covered? And making sure that there's, you know, out-of-pocket max and some financial protections in there too. So that's really kind of the goal, is to emphasize value throughout the year. That will also be with our paid media campaigns as well, not just customer communications, emphasizing it on our in our earned media as well. Supported by social posts, website updates, FAQs, and making sure that it's anywhere that somebody kind of interacts with Pennie that they're going to have that reminder. But through our special enrollment period advertising campaign, that emphasis is going to be value.
Your comments on that?
It's good, smart.
Yeah, and don't want to be tone deaf, you know, especially if you're saying, I mean, it is where you'll get the lowest costs on high quality coverage, but from a customer point of view, it's best to not sound tone deaf.
Any questions on that? Want to talk about the budget aspect of it, and just to kind of tee up what we'd be looking at from this perspective. So actually going to skip ahead 2 slides. So shared a slide that really depicts what would happen if we kept all of our costs the same, but our revenue decreased by 30%. 30% would be if we went back to the enrollment we had before the enhanced tax credits went into place. So as you can see, kind of right off the bat, in 2026, we would be at an operating deficit of almost 30 million, about 29 million. Now, we, as you know, have a lot of carryover funds. We're in a strong position financially because of some unique aspects that from these first few years. So we would be able to immediately apply those to that. We also have the $75 million reserve fund that we all voted to set aside for operational contingency as well. So that would be able to float us for a period of time, but within that period of time, we would have to change the cost side of the equation in order to be sustainable long-term. So just wanted to kind of highlight how drastic that gets pretty quickly. 30%, again, it's very unclear if we would drop by that much. This is really sort of an unprecedented, having this many people's premiums go up by, 82% on average is the projection. It's hard to really, there's no precedent for what would happen with enrollments. We just sort of took the blunt, approach of reverting back to what we had before. So that would drop revenues from around 102 million to down to 70 million. We are still also including the part that we get from Medicaid, the 15 million for our Medicaid related activities. Obviously, if there are changes to that, then we would, have to evaluate what happened to that line as well if there are broader changes to different aspects of Medicaid. So to do that, just at a high level, we just sort of started identifying which contracts have more flexibility and less flexibility, just to kind of to lay it out. I think, not looking for specific decisions today, but just to sort of start outlining the types of decisions we would have to have if these are not extended, and kind of make different trade-offs, with what we can change, how quickly, kind of using the carryover and the reserve funds as a float to the time where we can change some of these. So, for example, our biggest costs are the call center and the tech contract. Those contract costs are relatively fixed from the original contract that was put in place. So that would take, that would be harder and take a bit more time to work to address those. So that, for example, would be why it's so important to have the carryover funds and reserves that we can use to kind of give us time to make adjustments that are needed. Marketing, that's more flexible. At the same time, that's also more arguably very important, at a time when there's so much disruption and turmoil, as a way to try to get education out there. So, I think that's, again, these are going to be the trade-offs and discussions we're going to have. Same with the exchange of sister contract, as people are, really being impacted by this disruption more than ever. It might be helpful to have someone nearby on the ground to help you. So really trying to think through the different trade-offs. And then reinsurance is another part of our budget. That's targeted to be 50 million for the 2026 year. And that's tricky just because there's such a delay. So, we'd have to have a conversation around how that plays in, what we want to target for that amount. But the hard part around that is that, we set it, from the time we set it to the time we pay it is a full 2 years, because you have a full coverage year in between. So it's, there is some flexibility from a trade-off perspective, but the impact is quite delayed from when we set it to when we pay it out.
Sorry, quick question on that one. So if you change the reinsurance payout, would that potentially, would carriers' reaction to be that they would raise rates because they're not getting as much reinsurance dollars? Like, I just want to make sure I understand how it all.
So I think I'll answer from our exchange perspective, and then from the broader reinsurance perspective, I think we would have to figure out what we could actually pay into that program from the state contribution. And then I think that would have an impact on the overall parameters, but there would be a lot changing for that program as well.
Yeah, the hard part is there's such a lag. Like today, we're talking about parameters for 26 that don't come back until 27 mid-year. The law allows us to haircut companies. So if Pennie comes in with a lower amount than what was anticipated, you all would get a different amount of reimbursement than what we otherwise thought. And then I think presumably you would start to build into your rates no more comfort, because we've never had to haircut companies before in the reinsurance program. So if that becomes an actual risk, then I think that probably comes into play in your rate making process. Hopefully it doesn't happen. And I think we've been conservatively estimating, and actually we've overestimated Pennie's contribution, I think, every year so far. But these next couple of years are going to be very dependent on what happens in the next couple of months.
That rates go up, that it just could snowball even more, right? As far as the number of people who are able to continue to afford coverage and just trying.
Yeah, and I think the federal side of reinsurance is impacted too, because if it's an APTC pass through, and we're, as a state, we have less APTC. It's like, to your point, there's sort of a lot of pressures. We've had all the pressures sort of going towards enrollment growth, stabilization, all of that, and it's kind of across the board a reversal, and what, used to be referred to as the death spiral, where you're continuing to aggravate the problem because all of the factors work together to aggravate the problem and make it worse versus make it better. So I mean, obviously none of these things are things we want to cut. So that's going to be the challenge. I think when we see what happens, when we have a sense of what that's going to mean coming out of open enrollment from a revenue side, and I think like having, again, as it gets closer, starting to have more specific discussions with the board around what we think we would try to pull back on first, and then kind of what that looks like depending as we get more information with enrollment and coming out of open enrollment, given that we have a little bit of time, we can buy ourselves literally a little bit of time with our carryover and our reserves to make some of these changes and float ourselves for a bit. But wanted to kind of just tee up these different parameters because it's going to take a lot of conversation and want to kind of get the wheels spinning.
On the 30% reduction in enrollment, that projection, and you said it's hard to nail that down, but that was the enrollment before the enhanced subsidies went into effect. The Medicaid redetermination, was that in first where they were pausing Medicaid redetermination before the actual enhanced subsidies? I'm just trying to understand if there's a potential that there is some enrollment that was being kind of held back from floating into the exchanges for a period longer than before. It's hard to remember back with all the timing of all that stuff. Because I know that the APTC stuff came in the spring, I think it was of 21, right? I don't think it was the first year.
I think it was. This is Carl. I think that because FFCRA was when we began to hold Medicaid, and that was in basically summer of 2020.
Yeah. Then it was the following year, right, with the enhanced subsidies coming.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
never handled Medicaid.
So this might be a little bit of something that maybe if we looked at.
But I don't know how else Pennie would be able to benchmark
Yeah.
this kind of.
I'm trying to find some glimmer of.
Yeah, we just had to resubmit our 1332 application for our 5-year extension. What we submitted based on the economic analysis by Oliver Wyman, I think estimated minus 130,000+ people if the subsidies go away, because we have to estimate based on what the law currently says. So the extension assumes subsidies go away. And I think the first year was a drop of 130,000.
Yeah, and this again is a very pretty basic calculate. Like we didn't account for increased premiums. So even if it's smaller enrollment, the premiums have gone up. So there's going to be some puts and takes with this number. We wanted to sort of more, show that the general gap that we're going to have. I mean, and hopefully we don't lose 30%.
Right.
But it's a good point, yeah, because the unwinding, we didn't have that coming in. We basically just went back to the end of January 2021 number because we ended open enrollment. It was right before the EPDCs went into place.
Any other questions on contingency plan?
And I just wanted to thank Heather and her team they've done multiple iterations of a lot of different calculations on different scenarios, and they have a lot of work cut out ahead of them as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge them.
You're very behind on the agenda now, so apologies. But we'll roll into 2026. I think there's some strategic topics that we wanted to touch on, and maybe a little bit more abbreviated than we anticipated.
Yeah. So, with the proposed rule that threw a little wrench into our agenda.
For sure.
So we wanted to talk about, in many ways, yes, we have all this uncertainty. We also, wanted to talk about some ideas that we've been thinking about that could work both in very constrained budget scenario, but also if we continue in a position where we're very strong financially, wanting to be able to start taking that money and make investments into our program in areas where we think we could really make an impact. So the next 3 ideas that we're going to talk through, if we are constrained heavily from a budget perspective, there's very, very minimal versions of these we could do. If we continue to have a very strong financial position, these are areas where we think we could make really great investments. And then in some areas, we might decide that we need to do that anyway, just for the benefit of the program. So we will try to do the quicker version of these. And the first one, I'll turn over to Chachi, and it's tied to our first kind of portion of our goal, the trusted source of coverage. Hi.
So we're looking at building something that can live at Pennie.com that's a little bit, well, a lot of it, interactive for the consumer to understand some key aspects of Pennie, the application process, a glossary, a terminology there, to kind of help guide them and educate them at first kind of landing at Pennie.com. And that's kind of where we're very much in the preliminary phase of what this would look like, what kind of questions it's going to answer, what kind of problems it's going to solve for. So, we're going to evaluate that more through customer surveys, speaking with brokers, assisters, customer service reps, insurers even, and kind of building out a framework of what that's going to, building out the structure and then figuring out a timeline for either building it in-house or procuring a third party to build that. So what we're seeing is, potentially some income sliders, some interactive ways of adding different folks to your household, maybe even an application walkthrough, what you necessarily would need to bring whenever you start your application. So it's certainly going to be kind of cross-cutting, for a lot of the Pennie teams and potentially a third party, depending on budgetary limitations or legal limitations, might have some sort of AI integration in there. But just wanted to kind of prompt that again for the board, that this is kind of some work that we'll be working on in the coming months, and all really kind of to align that to our vision of being a trusted source for information, so that they're again, our focus is just being plain in our delivery, but also if we're giving the facts, we're giving the information in an interactive way that it gives folks the idea of like, how does this all work? Where do I fit into here? How much would I be eligible for? What am I getting myself into for it all? But also kind of giving them an idea of like what separates Pennie from outside the marketplace, what separates Pennie from Medicaid or Medicare or any other sort of government coverage as well. So just making sure like it's kind of like a one-stop landing spot to just kind of learn it all.
And I think to picking up on some of that of, what to do when you have different types of coverage, or if you aren't sure if your employer coverage is affordable, having a little tool. A lot of that is sort of embedded in the application. There's questions without really an explanation of what's happening behind the scenes. So someone gets a report out that, oh, your employer coverage is affordable, so you don't qualify. And there's not a lot of, it's sort of a black box of how that was decided. So even having a little standalone, hey, do you think you pay too much for your employer coverage? Here's a little tool. Oh, looks like you do. So maybe you apply to Pennie and see if that's an option for you. Kind of more of that, like, is Pennie even right for me question? Because we see a lot of people who get into the application and maybe it wasn't. Maybe they are on Medicaid and not understanding that they can't be on Marketplace if they're on Medicaid. So really trying to adjust some of that, and it ties into some of the other things we talked about with trying to get people answers to their questions as early on as possible, as accessibly as possible. So we would be something maybe right now they call the call center for, but now they can kind of find it on their own and do more of that self-service. So this sort of ties into that general consistency of information, allowing people to kind of find something more tailored to their experience and what they're looking for, and help them decide if this is right. Or my spouse is on Medicare, what are my options? Trying to, again, give people sort of insight into what happens if kids on CHIP. We hear a lot about too, mixed eligibility, people on Medicaid and Marketplace, CHIP and Marketplace, even playing out some of those scenarios as well. So really trying to address some of that. It would be pretty innovative. And no other states really kind of have this comprehensive knowledge center almost about exchanges. So in an ideal world, that's sort of what it could be, really focused on education, kind of in bite-sized pieces, as an alternative to a list of FAQs that people have to sort through. At a minimal step, it could be just sort of enhanced material, if we don't have a budget to sort of do something bigger, kind of more videos, walkthroughs, kind of more in-house materials that we can provide.
Just say any UI changes, again, back to the conversation earlier, like can it actually be tested by consumers? You know, sometimes it looks flashy and great, but then they don't understand how to use it. They don't, you know, like it's a Volkswagen that's moving back to dials because people couldn't, you know, they can't figure out how to like just pull things over or whatever to do volume or whatever it may be. Like we don't want to over tech it, you know, so.
Beauty of something like this is, especially web pages, they are very easy to prototype. You can create all levels of interaction with those, and you're not actually interacting with the application of the system itself and potentially impacting other areas. So there's a whole host of capabilities that you can do from a prototyping, from simulations that keep it isolated from the day-to-day work, so you're not impacting, but they can see how the screens are, how the pages are displayed, how they can interact with the pages, how they look, and if the information is presented in a clean way. And it takes nothing to be able to move things around on the UI page, whereas when you get into the application, it takes a little more to actually interact with an application.
Yeah, because I think it's the words too. It's the experience plus the words, like how does that.
Yeah, it could also live within, scheduling appointments with either a broker and a sister. It could be, just not even just beyond the eligibility side or understanding side of just like quickly getting somebody over to some help.
I guess I'd be curious on how that piece would work, right? Like how are you deciding how you're routing people?
Yeah.
For conversation.
Yeah, I think it's sort of it's just an idea at this point. So I think that for all of these three, some sort of have more direct next steps than others, but I think the idea is to sort of float it now, get you guys kind of thinking about it. We would also just start trying to get feedback on where we think the biggest pain points are, where we think we could start with something like this, and then kind of prioritize what we would look to try to do and look at the different iterations possible based on level of funding or not. So the next two are Rob. So we have half hour left, and I'll let you determine how you want to do this.
Can you get me over to that? So the second thing that we wanted to discuss was essentially looking at the contact center. So as one of the previous slides, mentioned, this is really the largest expense in our largest contractual expense, if that makes sense. So what we wanted to do was analyze what our options are going forward with the contact center. The reason being because we still have about a little less than 2 years left on our base contract with Get Insured for contact center services. So we really have to start evaluating whether we want to exercise option years. We have 3 that we can exercise. We can exercise them individually or all at the same time. And we want to compare that and make sure that we're doing an analysis. What is best for our customers? And basically you have 3 options. First option would again be exercising option years with Get Insured to maintain the contact center that we have. The second option would be if we explore building an in-house internal Pennie contact center. And the third option would just be putting it out for a request for proposal and seeing if we get any bids. Just for some real high-level background information. So again, I mentioned how the option years work. Currently, Get Insured is fielding about 800,000 calls a year for us, and they process between them and our internal staff about 1,000 to 1,200 escalations a year, depending on the year, because they do help us a lot with ticketing. So those are kind of the main parameters that we'd be looking at. And what we wanted to do today was really just kind of lay the foundation for this discussion, focus on high-level pros and cons of each of these 3 preliminary options, and then we move forward with it with a full-fledged out business case at future board meetings to do a comparative analysis and see which recommendation we'd have. So in looking at kind of what we want to do with the contact center, Jennifer mentioned our goals earlier. So this kind of really speaks to goal 1 and goal 2 that we went over for the organizational goals. So just a refresher, goal 1 was really the focus on quality, accuracy, consistency. And it was really wanting to focus in on resolving customer issues at earliest point of contact. So on first call resolution or first time that we receive an email, chat from them, whatever. Goal 2 was really aimed at reducing consumer burden. And that was through streamlined processes while maintaining program integrity. So for when we're evaluating the contact center, we're using kind of those two high-arching organizational goals to kind of put together a lens of these sub-goals of what we want to look at. So we want to look at intuitiveness, so that kind of speaks towards how easy is it for the customer to understand the complexities of the ACA, and how is the contact center really assisting with this. The second goal that we're looking at is really probably the primary one. So it's quality and accuracy. So we want to make sure that we're correct, consistent, and complete information is given every single time that a customer reaches out to us through whichever channel they reach out to us. The third is proactiveness. This kind of speaks to earlier discussions that we've had today. Again, this could be something even with appeals. So if we see that something is trending, we want to be proactive and try to make communications as early as possible to assist all consumers so that they hopefully don't have to go through pain points that others might have had to go through. Fourth is dynamics, so really just maintain a flexible posture so we could adapt to changing technology or change to any program needs like this rule change, for instance. Third, or the next one would be timeliness, which is really ensuring that we are resolving them as early as possible and correctly in the quickest amount of time for the customer. The second to last one is empathetic, so really just understanding Pennsylvanians and their unique needs to make sure that they are successful in dealing with Pennie. And then the final thing was really efficiency. So we really want the highest quality that's in an efficient, cost-effective manner. So for option one, again, that's maintain, get insured, just some more background information on their contract. So each year, the costs for that contract do increase, which is standard really for any contract. You'd expect to see that. What we pay in our base contract covers a few services. So calls, inbound chats, tickets, and resolution like that. These costs currently in 2025 are about $18.4 million. If we exercised each of the option years, that would increase year over year, and the final option year would be about $21.6 million that we'd be paying just for this inbound services. It's worth noting that I'm highlighting the inbound portion because we actually pay a separate contract, about $1.4 million, just for our outbound dialing campaigns. So that's a separate cost that we have. If we did lose EPTCs, if they were not extended, this would probably be something that would probably have to be let go because it's a large cost. And so in terms of looking at the flexibility of this arrangement, that is one thing we want to highlight is that it's only for inbound calls. So we have to pay separately for outbound calls. So when we're looking at the three options, that's one thing to consider.
Cheryl, is the inbound call, are the inbound call increases going to go into effect even if we have reduced enrollment?
Yes, so they are fixed contractual costs. So they would still go into effect even with reduced enrollment. Now, hypothetically, we could try to negotiate during option years, but for 2026, that's a set cost. And then additionally, it would be up to negotiation whether or not we'd be able to get that amount lower in option years.
Yeah, that's surprising for a contact center contract.
Yes, it is. So in terms of, again, high-level pros and cons. So I think Get Insured is excellent at they answer calls quickly. So a lot of our SLAs are very, very strong. So I think the advantages would speak not only to that, but we would have continuity with them. So we would not have to stand up a different option, whether it be a different vendor or an internal option. Additionally, there is some flexibility that comes with Get Insured. They currently service multiple state exchanges that work for in the ACA landscape. What that means is if we had higher call volumes, they could shift resources from, say, Virginia or Georgia to us. There is a quality issue that comes with that, but they could at least adjust resources to make sure that we're having speed to answer being covered. Some of the disadvantages that we have, so as you just pointed out, cost is probably the first and foremost, the largest one. So it's going to be over $20 million just for inbound services, pretty much going forward from this point on. There's less flexibility, so we're not really able to quickly implement new technologies, or if we want to do a new customer relationship management system, anything like that, because it is beholden to what they would be able to implement with their staff. Additionally, I think the main thing might be control and transparency. So we don't have full control over training, which means we don't have full control over quality. We don't have full control over the CSR knowledge bases. Again, these are what they provide us as part of their contractual services. So we could give recommendations, but we can't dictate what they actually do provide in terms of all of those. Additionally, it's less dynamic, and we couldn't be as proactive as we might be able to be if we explored another option. And then finally, again, worth highlighting, the outbound dialing services are an additional, at a minimum, $1 million each year, probably closer to 1.5 if we want to maintain the level of staffing that we have in the recent past. Option 2 is the in-house contact center. So this would essentially be where we would explore developing and staffing our own internal contact center. The advantages would be, again, we'd have control over the cost itself. Now, not necessarily cost savings always guaranteed, because we want to shoot for higher quality probably. So we would still have to put some cost in, but we would have more dynamic control of that should we have to shave costs in the future if we saw that EPTCs were going away and that we had to make some changes to actually adjust our costs. So there are potential cost savings there. Additionally, this would allow us to be more dynamic in terms of what we're offering. So we would be able to do inbound and outbound services. There would be no limitation on what we could provide there. We could explore inbound chats, emails, whatever points of contact we thought were best, we'd be able to implement. We'd have ownership of quality and training, so we would allow for more accuracy. Really, it would be beholden on us, right? At the end of the day, if we're having quality issues, that would be on our team and our staff. So it would be full ownership and control of what that resource management would look like, as well as the training for those resources. Another advantage, which I don't think is a small one, but it would benefit Pennsylvanians, right? So these would be jobs that would be in Pennsylvania. Additionally, that would help stir word of mouth for Pennie itself. If you know someone that's working at Pennie, that helps drum up support for people that might not otherwise know what Pennie does. And then finally, we would have full control over our strategic endeavors. And that would really boil down to, we could change the key performance indicators when we thought necessary to make sure we were addressing the number 1 concerns or number 2 concern that we were seeing at that point in time. The disadvantages, I don't want to understate, it's a large undertaking, right? So we would have to completely build from scratch a complex contact center that would be able to hire, skill up, and staff an entire team of at least probably 200 CSRs is what we'd be looking at. So it's a large undertaking. We would need to develop the onboarding, the training, the workforce and performance management, and the quality assurance programs. And then the other thing worth mentioning, the proposed rule kind of throws a wrinkle in this one. Hypothetically, if we were to go with this option in the future after the base year contract had expired, the transition would most likely occur within an open enrollment period, because our contracts with Get Insured go through the end of the year. So they end on December 31st. Now, if the rule change goes into effect, this would be a moot point, but it's something that would add to complexity should we have to actually make the transition in the middle of an open enrollment period.
Just one thing on this one that I think we just need to contemplate, if this is a viable option, is just redundancy. Like, love the fact that we would be able to give jobs to Pennsylvanians, but what if there was some sort of natural disaster or whatever it may be? What happens then, right? Like, where are we putting contact centers in multiple places across the state? Like, I think that's especially the time of the year that we're talking about. Well, I mean, the biggest time of the year, right? Even just snowstorms could, become problematic and things like that. I just want to.
And that's an excellent thing that we would do in our risk when we're putting together the business plan. That's one of the risks. I think hypothetically, we would probably we'd evaluate both brick and mortar versus remote, but hopefully it would be remote and hopefully it would be spread throughout the Commonwealth. Just have some mitigation there, but that is something that you could expect to see in the full business case when it comes to the potential risks with this. We would have to plan for that.
Would you plan for like rollover options? Like if we didn't have enough staff in open enrollment, people started waiting, 25 minutes to get somebody. Would we have a backup plan?
We could do something similar to what Get Insured actually did when Pennie first launched. Is there was a third-party vendor that was used for high call volumes to actually transition some of those calls over to this other third-party vendor that would essentially just schedule callbacks with our CSR staff. So we would need to plan for pretty much all of this if we were implementing it. So it would essentially look at what happens if we are seeing large calls. Do we handle that through IVR callbacks? Do we handle that through an actual third-party vendor? If we are short on staff, do we have a vendor that could do contractual seasonal staff if necessary for open enrollments?
I imagine from a budget perspective, you're talking 200 people. Like that's lots.
A lot.
Yeah.
But keeping the money,
But we spend a lot today, but I just wonder like what that ballpark would look like. If we-
So I could give you a very high level estimate for what it would be, based on preliminary research. It'd be about $14.6 million just for the 200 CSRs if they were unionized, titled state employees. And then we'd also need like supervisors, managerial staff, things like that.
From a language perspective, would we do that or would we do a third party?
Ideally, if we did this, we'd at least bring in a bilingual Spanish staff, but we would probably have to or we'd have to contract out for other languages, most likely.
Have we thought about cost for that?
It's weird, that's going to be in the analysis. I don't have preliminary costs on that. The good news is with a lot of these costs like CRM, with that, the state already does have certain contracts in place that we could do a memorandum of understanding. We could probably piggyback on some of those existing contracts. So we should be able to see some cost savings if we do go that route.
This is Joel. I'm assuming there's no issues with the timing, or you wouldn't be proposing an RFP, and there's no issues with, when the options either have to be exercised or notice given. If that's the case, I would suggest, why don't you consider an RFP where, sounds a little, sounds silly, but you're including yourself in the RFP. So you're running an RFP, and while you're comparing external options, you're comparing the internal options against them. Did that make sense the way?
That did. So we could definitely explore that opportunity. I think AP, we would have to talk.
Yes, we would need to see the procurement rules are very strict. So I'm not even quite sure if that would be feasible, but it's something that we would look at.
But yeah, and I'll leave that to you. What I'm saying is, and maybe I made it sound a little more formal than it had to be, but what I'm saying is you put that RFP out there, but you are always evaluating it against the internal option. You've already run through, and here's the advantages, the disadvantages. You've talked about the cost. All of those things need to be compared with the external options, whatever you get in response to this RFP. But I'll leave the mechanics to you.
Yes, we would need to look at it, but that's a very good idea.
I was going to note too that RFPs, especially through the state process, are extremely resource intensive. So I think we would also have to look at if we were like feasibly about, potentially able to, both would be very resource intensive. So I think it would be hard to kind of plan for both at the same time, because it would be the same resources, doing resource intensive things for either standing up our own or doing an RFP for a new one. So I think that would be something we'd have to look at just to see if we thought we could sustain or even try to do a dual track.
Just for awareness, typically for an RFP, you're looking at a minimum of 18 months to pull it off. So, yeah, I guess the procurement rules, I think it would be helpful for some of us to understand them a little bit better, just because the whole assister contract, we ended up with a limited number of folks we could evaluate because of those procurement rules. I wouldn't want the same thing to happen here, in that,
Yeah, and we would be more than happy that maybe during an informational session, just go over what we can do just to inform the board members of the process that is set up for governmental procurement.
So is the estimate of 200 people, is that like an open enrollment figure, or like if Pennie had 200 more people today, that what, quadruples Pennie staff, something like that?
Yeah.
What would they, I imagine you don't get enough calls on Wednesday, March 12th for 200 people in the call center, right?
And so that would be a higher level of staffing than we historically maintain. Right now, we actually probably have about 200 that are designated to us. But when we get to the off season, say in the summertime, that's where we would see that. We would want to look at, so one, ticketing. They could always work on tickets if there are tickets, but we would want to assess, and this is part of what the assessment would be essentially. What is the point of fixed staff that we would need? And is there the possibility of where we actually do augmented staff that comes in for open enrollment? So that estimate that I gave for the 200 was just to give you a ballpark of, we think we would have longer wait times, but we would have probably higher quality with those 200 staffed around the board. But we would do, when we do the full analysis, we would look into saying, is the point 150 CSRs that we need to maintain throughout the year, and then just boost up the staffing right around with seasonal staff right around open enrollment to say, like in October, for October 1st, we get everyone staffed and trained up, and then we do a layoff after the open enrollment ends. So there would be, those are going to be considered, but the 200, some thoughts like preliminarily, there are hopefully other things that we might be able to leverage and possibly even working with our DHS partners to see if they needed assistance with some like outbound call campaigns or something like that. We could try to explore that too. It's kind of the flexibility that would be built in if we had our own internal staff.
And this is Cheryl. This isn't different than what insurers go through around open enrollment. And you learn to modulate how much staff you need when, and you're fully in control of quality and messaging and, local presence, knowing the Pennsylvania and so forth. I mean, for us, for UPMC, having the in-house call center is just invaluable.
It's Alexis, does the contact center, I'll say platform, the technology, is that part of the contact center part of your contract or part of the system? So would you get to if you built an internal contact center, does it get to make use of that technology?
So we would still, currently, again, sure, it does both sides of the house, so
Yep.
tech and contact center. We would still have them, unless we put out an RFP on the tech side, we would still have them as our tech vendor through the option years if we exercise each of them. So we'd still be able to use that. We would need to establish our own CRM system and telephony system because they do currently provide those. The CRM and telephony would both be most likely Genesis if we went this route, because that's what the other Commonwealth agencies use.
This is Amy. Can you speak to, not in detail, but like generally whether other states have done this either in either direction, like move from contract to in-house or in-house to contract? Like what that's experience?
So there are a few exchanges that have their own internal contact centers, one of whom even uses Get Insured for Tech. Idaho does that. Covered California is the largest example of having their own internal contact center, but they obviously have a much larger staff. It's like 1,500 people. But the other exchanges, the majority of them use vendors, and there's differing vendors. In going to conferences, I'll be honest, that you hear often that they are always evaluating the options to see if it's the best solution for them, and they tend to seem to put it out for RFP each time that their contract comes up, even instead of doing option years. So there has been, we've heard about some vendors that are providing, I guess, subpar performance in the eyes of these other exchanges. In terms of the in-house solution, only it's the majority or the minority that has it, but they all seem very pleasantly impressed with the contact centers that they have. Then the third option would be the request for proposal. So this is admittedly of the three, even just at the preliminary stage, probably the most daunting, even though building an internal contact center is not necessarily easy. The reason being, as Heather and others have mentioned, the procurement process is a little elongated. So the advantages would hypothetically be there could be potential cost savings because we might get vendors that come in with competitive bidding at lower rates. Hypothetically, there could be multiple vendors that bid, and they might have differing solutions to what they're actually offering. And then the other advantage would be we could probably better define what our service level agreements or key performance indicators are to make sure that they're meeting our needs. The disadvantages are no surprise. It's length of time to do the actual RFP process. We might not receive many bids. It's completely up to what the market is and how many people do want to submit a bid. Additionally, there would probably be a high need for technical assistance, at least within that first year, to actually do the transitioning. And then you would have an uncertainty around quality, training, and accuracy. It would be the same things that you get with any vendor. And then finally, the transition might occur during the open enrollment period. So we're still evaluating all three of these options. Again, we're going to have these more tied to costs and what it would actually look like if we were to pursue each of these options. And we just want to kind of put this on the table now for you all to think about and to get any feedback that you have pertaining to it.
Don't we also have an RFI option that can move faster than an RFP, right? Where we just go out for information on who may be interested in this space and what they could provide. PID's thought about doing something like that on other issues in the past, but
that is an option that we could have through the procurement system in the state. There are different options. We can do an RFQ, which is a request for proposals, or a request for information. And we could just look at the details and see which one may be more beneficial, if that is something that we would be interested in. The request for information is not always applicable to the needs of an agency. It really depends on what we're looking at. So I would need to go back and look and see if an RFI is even a possibility at this point for these type of services.
Was just trying to think about it from like the information gathering stage, if we could do something quicker to decide if we'd want to go down the RFP path. But it's not.
It may be an option. I can look into that as well.
Else for contact center discussion?
This, Amy, it's a one quick question, just very narrow, but one of the disadvantages you mentioned in the RFP and the insurer, and the in-house one is the timing of open enrollment. Is it, is an extension on a contract a way of resolving that, or is it not possible?
So how the contract's currently written, it doesn't contemplate just monthly options. It's only yearly. Again, it would be something that potentially could be negotiated, but it's not, it's not very likely, to be honest.
Do you have anything from the sister side? You probably experienced the call center.
Yes. So going through the scenarios and the information you provided, very interesting. I'm trying to use my words. Customer experience, assister experience varies based on the information that you've collected. Being on the ground with service level agreements and knowing what is expected as an assister, and the experience that the information you've collected seems to vary, seems to be very different. With focus groups, you get different information. Actually calling the call center currently, you get different information. I will say overall, the experience from consumers, from customers has not been great, which is one of the reasons why I, as a board member, am glad that we are looking at options and discussing what's best for customers and what's best for Pennie. We're responsible, fiscally responsible for what we spend and how we spend it. And we get feedback directly from customers that they're not able to get through on the phone. When they call, it's never a first call resolution. It's always multiple phone calls. It's long wait times. It's incorrect information. That's the general feedback you get from customers. Assisters spend inordinate amounts of time on the phone for password changes, for information. Things that should be easy are not. So I'm glad we are delving into this discussion and look forward to see what the decision is that comes back from the board.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I know we're pretty much at 3. We had one more topic. Are people okay doing another 10 or 15 minutes?
I could break everyone's heart and just go to the summary slide, right? I know you're all waiting for the small business information. So essentially what we wanted to do was just do an evaluation of really small employers within the Commonwealth. So we did background information first at the national level and then also at the level within Pennsylvania. Some of the data is hard to come by, to be honest. We relied heavily on secondary sources. But what we wanted to do was really look into this subsection of our possible customers and see what potential strategic efforts we could have going forward with them. So right now it's really just informational. We're seeking feedback from you, from our stakeholders, small business owners and employees on the current coverage challenges or pain points that they've been having. This research helps us identify some of the key gaps in education that might exist so that we can reach out to certain subsets again of potential customers and see if that we could be a solution for them if they're uninsured. And then we would also want to evaluate in the future any policy levers or even system changes that we might be able to make to kind of try to accommodate these groups of people. So essentially, just some background information on employers and the self-employed. So as you're all aware, so the Affordable Care Act requires any applicable large employer, which is really anyone with 50 or more full-time equivalent employees, to offer insurance. And they could either choose to offer group insurance, or they could offer individual contribution or individual coverage health reimbursement arrangement to at least 95% of their employees and their dependents. They don't have to offer to spouses, but they do have to offer to their employees and dependents. Small employers, on the other hand, they're not required to offer coverage. So they can choose to offer small group coverage. They could choose to offer what's called a qualified small employer health reimbursement arrangement, or again, an ICHRA if they wanted to. Employees who are not offered affordable minimum essential coverage through their employer that meets the minimum value standard, they're allowed to come to Pennie and they're allowed to enroll with us and receive financial assistance as long as they're otherwise eligible for that financial assistance. So the thing worth noting there is that spouses and dependents who are offered traditional group plans, but whose family premium amount would be too high to be affordable, they could come to us and they could potentially get financial savings. And we'll get into the data a little more. I promised a summary, but you guys have 15 minutes, so I'll try. I'll probably go more into the stats than I originally promised. But we think that this specific group is a possibility where, for the interactive tool or future reference materials on our site, there might be some help. The reason being because even if a spouse or dependent is deemed to have an unaffordable offer of employer-sponsored coverage, they would still have to navigate the difficulties of having two different plans, right? The employee might have the employer-sponsored plan, and then the dependents and spouse might be within Pennie. So that's might not be affordable to have two different premiums. It might not be affordable to have all those cost sharings. So I think we could probably improve upon our materials to make this complex like subsection a little more understandable for anyone that would be evaluating whether or not they should come to Pennie. And then the final thing for just kind of background information. So self-employed individuals and their spouses, they're not actually eligible for QSARAs or ICHRAs in most situations. So they would really have to rely upon Pennie for financial savings. So that's the transition to the kind of the background information on national data. So self-employed workers they're a large subset of our enrollees. In fact, the Treasury Department estimates that about 25% of Pennie's enrollees are either self-employed or small business owners. And one thing worth noting, this subset, so self-employed especially, they are very sensitive and very likely to be uninsured. So if we do see EPTCs not extended, this is a group that would probably see increases in their uninsured rate. If we look at statistics, even from 2017 to 2019, we saw increases in their uninsured rate. Those were heavily decreased once EPTCs went into effect. But if those were to go, this is a subset that we might lose in terms of enrollments. In terms of employers that offer employer-sponsored coverage, the vast majority, almost all, do end up offering coverage to the spouse and then the dependents as required. Only roughly 1/4 of employers actually offer insurance to their part-time employees. So there's a large avenue of potential for part-time employees coming to Pennie because, again, 3/4 of them are not even offered coverage. And then an interesting statistic that we're able to pull in our research, roughly 4 to 7% of employers offer not necessarily ICHRAs, but at least funds to employees to purchase non-group coverage. So it could be an ICHRA, could be another type of HRA based off the data that we pulled. And very interestingly, 88% of the firms that actually do currently offer employer-sponsored coverage said they're not likely to move in the direction of ICHRAs within the next 2 years. So I know in the news it's been kind of reported on that ICHRAs are maybe the next big thing in health insurance. At least from the data that we're seeing from Kaiser Family Foundation and other sources, the surveys are not yet showing that it's trending in that direction. And we'll have some statistics on what our enrollees look like in terms of ICHRAs and QSARAs at the end. So really the vast majority of employers within the country and also within Pennsylvania are small employers, but they only employ about 1/4 of all workers. So while most companies are small employers, most employees work for large employers, if that makes sense. And about 72% of workers who are covered through employer-sponsored insurance work for a company that has at least 200 employees. So that's a large employer, which makes sense. Roughly 65% of all uninsured workers have indicated that their employer does not offer them health insurance. So we know that the reason that they tend to be uninsured is either because the employer doesn't offer insurance or because they're maybe part-time and they believe that it's not cost effective for them to have insurance through that employer. Some of the reasons that the employers say that they are not offering coverage is often they think their company is too small. That's a large percentage. Additionally, costs are obviously near the top of the list. And then one thing that I think is worth noting, 63% of covered workers are in a self-funded plan. And what I think is most telling about that is 36% of employees that are covered at a small firm, they are using level funded plans. The reason I think that's interesting is because that is probably leading to continued erosion of the small group market, because level funding plans are probably more cost effective for employers. And that's why we're probably seeing continued decreases in the small group market. And then the last thing worth noting at the national level is that only about 1/4 of large firms actually offer retiree health benefits. So again, another subsection that we might be looking into is our early retirees. So transitioning quickly to Pennsylvania's employer landscape, we have an estimated 2.5 million individuals, or about half of our workforce within the Commonwealth, actually work for small businesses. About 52.1% of all employers, so not just small businesses, offer health insurance within the Commonwealth. So that seems like a very starkly low number, but again, keep in mind the vast majority of employers are small businesses. So what happens is they're diluting the numbers for what the total offer rate is. What is interesting to note, though, is we do trend behind the national average with certain things. So our small firms that are basically under 50 employees, 2/3 of those do not offer insurance to their employees. So the vast majority of small business employees are not offered health insurance in Pennsylvania. This continues a decrease that has been occurring since well before the ACA even went into effect. This goes back, data's hard to find, before the mid-90s, but if you look back to the mid-90s, you're seeing a market decrease over the past few decades. It was not necessarily even exacerbated by the ACA. It's this kind of continued trend that we've been seeing. The smaller the firm that we see, the less likely it is to offer insurance. So if it has fewer than 10 employees, it's less likely to offer insurance than someone, say, with 25 employees. And then additionally, as we mentioned, the small group market in Pennsylvania continues to slowly decrease by about 4% over the past 4 years. So it is a slow decrease that continues that predated the ACA. So just some more quick statistics about Pennsylvania specifically. If you are employed by a firm that's existed for at least 5 years, you're 6 times more likely to be offered insurance than if it's a new business, which kind of makes sense. New businesses tend to not actually offer insurance. Additionally, it depends on kind of the industry that's involved. So retail and kind of agricultural industries, they have much lower offer rates than, say, mining or professional services. They tend to have higher offer rates. Additionally, 1/3 of employers who had fewer than 50% full-time employees offered employer-sponsored coverage. So essentially, the larger makeup of full-time employees you have, the more likely you are to actually offer insurance. And then finally, the lower wages that the higher percentage of lower wage employees that you have, the less likely you are to offer insurance. So I know that was boring as can be. So what does that mean? The summary is essentially, these are the areas that we think we could look into where there are pockets of uninsured, that we could provide additional information, potentially policy solutions, potentially, educational materials, whatever it might be. So self-employed, first and foremost, that's one of our backbone demographics for who we target for enrollment through us. Additionally, part-time employees, 3 and 4 of them are not offered employer-sponsored coverage. So we think we should try to welcome them to Pennie to explore their options, see if there's an affordable plan for them to enroll in. Additionally, small businesses, about 2 out of 3 do not offer insurance. So it's, again, another viable option for them to come to Pennie and see if they should enroll with us. Early retirees while they're waiting to transition into Medicare, a lot of them tend to not have other options available to them. So again, come to Pennie. And finally, spouses and dependents who fall within the family glitch so that their employer-sponsored coverage would be unaffordable for them, we think is another little pocket of people that we could try to reach out to. So our current efforts have really been primarily outreach efforts and then also developing materials, but we think there's still more to do there. And then the one thing worth mentioning, we recently implemented ICHRA and QSARA system functionality, but we've seen a very low take up. So just for background information on ICHRA and QSARA is, again, they're health reimbursement arrangements. It depends on employer size. QSARA is for small employers and ICRA is for any size employers. The key statistic, though, that we want to show there is that we've had so far less than 1,000 of our enrollees indicate that they were offered an ICRA or QSARA. And you can see that the enrollment count is about 50% for ICRAs of those who were offered insurance or offered an ICRA have enrolled through Pennie, and about a little higher percentage for QSARAs, where it's the majority of the ones that were offered QSARAs did enroll through Pennie. So we've not necessarily leaning into this solution, but we wanted to highlight one solution that we've been exploring. It's had low take up. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing because group insurance might be the best option for a lot of employees, but it's just something that we're keeping an eye on because we know that there's been a lot of national discussions with this. So to summarize it all, we really put together this information to kind of highlight some of the pockets that we could try to focus on in terms of outreach efforts or potential future solutioning, and then to also see who would be most sensitive to the EPTCs expiring. This is another group that we probably haven't discussed as much in the past that might be impacted by those expirations that we might need to try to do, additional educational materials or outreach efforts to try to maintain their enrollments. Boring way to end, right? I tried to, Mike.
No, I mean, it's important to look at the small group market and certainly any educational information that we can provide to make available to employers that may or may not offer insurance. I mean, I think one of the challenging places is, the individual market now dwarfs the ACA small group market. I mean, we're fewer than 400,000 now in our commercial small group market, in large part because I think level funded, self-funded plans have become more attractive to small employers, but potentially some of that is they don't know what may be available on the other side. So I think continuing to develop partnerships and provide information could be helpful.
What is our take though on preserving what's left of the small group market?
What do you mean? What's our take on it?
I mean, is there an interest in preserving that small group market? Or are we saying we really think the future is pivoting that business out? Because from a carrier perspective, we may have different opinions. I'm just trying to understand, are we trying to support both markets or are we saying, because what are the marketing efforts? Who are you targeting? How are we don't get into a lot of detail on that
That's what
piece.
problem you're trying to solve.
So
Are you getting after that problem?
I think
I don't think it's for lack of options.
Yeah. And
Right.
so I think we would be targeting primarily those who are uninsured rather than cannibalizing the small group market.
And the difference, that's the part I just.
Well, and so we're trying to figure out solutioning. So primary data is hard to come by because it's dependent on what information the consumer provides in their application. And to be honest, the number one job we have listed is job. People in a free form text, they're not putting what their actual employer is. It's hard to get primary information for that. But we want to try to do a deeper dive to make sure that we are primarily targeting just the uninsured, because we don't want to inadvertently siphon off enrollees from small group. But if their family coverage is not affordable, we'd want their spouses and dependents to be able to come to us. Or if their employer is not offering it, it could be scary. They might not realize that they're able to come to us and receive subsidies if they're not offered an actual affordable minimum value standard plan to their employer. And I'm not sure that all unemployed employees or uninsured employees notice that because, again, 66% almost aren't even offered. They don't seem to technically know that the exchanges are a viable option for them to go to. And I think it's part of it is confusion because they think they're not allowed to have it if they are employed. They almost think it's like an unemployed benefit.
I think what we would want to try to do, and to that point is, there's clearly already a trend happening in the small group market. So I think we're, not wanting to really impact that, but just sort of acknowledging that only 1 in 3 offer the coverage. Sort of is there a way that we can, tailor our explanation of how Pennie works to sort of people who might be in that mixed situation if they have, or if they're working without any coverage, or if it's through a spouse and they're not offered it. And I think part of it too would be to try to understand more of talk with stakeholders across Pennsylvania to say, okay, for those who are not offering it, what are the barriers? And if you don't get it from your small employer, what options have you looked at? Try to do kind of that fact finding to get a little deeper into exactly what the thinking and barriers are for people who are uninsured and working for small employers. And then I think that could help us lead to if there's a way we could support those populations, those pockets better. through education, or if there's, you know, if a policy solution kind of arises out of those conversations, being able to talk about that as well. But I think kind of at a minimum, looking at if there's more we can do to support, like the QSARA and NCROs are inherently complicated, and not surprised there's not a lot more take up on that because it's pretty tricky to figure out all the rules. So if QSARA is something where we hear, hey, you know, we looked at that but couldn't figure it out, then maybe it's something where we provide more of a QSARA support tools or something like that for people who are seriously looking at the option but are getting stuck on it. So I think it's seeing that there's opportunities here, wanting to do more fact finding, more sort of digging into seeing if we can really pull out some of those threads by working with stakeholders across PA, and then seeing that there's opportunities for us to kind of help fill the gap, not remove coverage from someone who has it, but kind of fill the gap for people who don't have it.
I think it brings up a bit of a question for me. I know going back a bit, but Chachi, you mentioned there was there's some contacts that we were doing right now on the heels of redetermination that we could shut off and apply to something new. You're talking about, hey, are you doing some outreach already or just thinking about it?
And I think
We're consistently always talking with small business development centers, chambers of commerce. That's like a consistent part of our outreach target.
Okay, but not outreach like consumer outreach. That's or you are. Because I think I'm just trying to understand where the primary focus is, where the main capacity is placed, especially in terms of, you know, budget concerns and so forth, to say, this is our primary. If we exceed that goal or what have you, then this is how we're going to manage access. So I'm just more trying to understand where the capacity comes from.
And I think the core foundation is really that educational component. So like the outreach that his team might be doing, it's not necessarily going to that employer saying, you should offer a QSARA. But it's, if you're not offering insurance, Pennie's a solution for your employees. So if we are seeing, you know, it's especially with small business associations or chambers of commerce, they have a lot of new, you know, general partnerships or new companies that are just coming up that they could tap into and say, if you're not able to offer benefits right now, here's where you should direct your employees so that this is a trusted source where they can actually explore coverage options. And then, you know, hopefully they get to the point where they're offering group coverage. We wouldn't be upset with that if that ended up being. But it's really, we're trying to lay that educational foundation primarily for the employers, but also I think our website could probably use some refreshing for employees that are coming to us to try to figure out what their options might be, to make sure that everyone fully understands what they are entitled to, like what type of benefits they can get, when they can't have subsidies or when they can have subsidized coverage. So really just trying to make sure that we have a level playing field in terms of education.
Other thoughts, questions? Any other business? Your last agenda item. All right, then we will go ahead and adjourn, and we can go on mute. And Devin can talk about. We appreciate it. And, we'll be back on, when's our next meeting?
May 16th.
In mid-May. Thanks.